Welcome to the Stories to Tell podcast. In this edition, our special guest is Dita Dow. I get to speak with Dita about her wonderful short story books, a truly remarkable experience she had while walking with her dog in Albuquerque, and we kick things off with Dita's love of archaeology.
Well, I love archaeology. As a kid, growing up, I grew up in the East Mountains here east of Albuquerque, and the hill behind our house, actually at the top, was sandstone, and there was a sandstone ledge that as kids we found petroglyphs. And I just thought those were fascinating.
And what are petroglyphs?
So these were drawings done by Native Americans on the sandstone, and, 1,000 years ago. And it was...
What a remarkable find as a kid, yeah.
And I guess that probably started the love of archaeology and wondering there were people here before I was living here, and what did they do?
Right.
It just makes you think.
Right.
And so I thought, okay, when I go to college, I'm going to become an archaeologist because the movie Indiana Jones had come out.
Right. I bet the...
And...
I bet the applications to whatever
right.
department that was skyrocketed.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. I had visions of I'm going to be just like, Indiana Jones. I'm going to be at the Great Pyramids in Egypt, and we're going to be doing all this stuff. But my dad had to have a talk with me and tell me I probably would not make a living doing that, and I needed to do something else. So, but I've never lost that love of the past. And, my husband and I just this last summer were up at Chaco Canyon. I don't know why, I've lived here my whole life. We've never gone to Chaco Canyon. And you're on a dirt road. It's rough getting there. And I felt like, wow, we're in the middle of nowhere. We really are in the middle of nowhere. And there's these massive buildings that were built. And it just makes you feel you're pretty small. And there were very intelligent civilizations way back. And I don't think we really think about that. I think we think we're so smart now. And even the Great Pyramids and stuff, the engineering that has gone into these, that they're still here for us to enjoy and explore. So that's an amazing place to be.
How many approximately, because that's a place that Susan and I have wanted to go to. It's quite a remarkable story and the ruins that are left up there. Wasn't there was hundreds of Chaco people that lived there at the time, right?
It was a very, very large, what I've heard described as basically a hub, a large city where there was a lot of trading going on. And as you go out from Chaco, we always think of just Chaco, and I don't even know what the radius is, but there is a place called the Guadalupe Ruins, which if you take the highway as you're going towards Cuba, there is a turnoff, and Cabazon Peak is out there, and there is a dirt road. It took us 4 tries to try and find the Guadalupe Ruins, but they are up on top of a mesa. You would never know they were there. My boss happened to tell me about them. And beautiful. There's kivas that they've built now roofs over to preserve. And it is considered a Chaco outlier.
Yes.
And there's a bunch of those. And I think, wow, this is spanning miles and miles that they had communities and, villages. It's just amazing to me.
Is what you're referring to, it's on top of a mesa that when you're standing down on the ground, it's just, here's another mesa, and then you kind of make your way up. It's a little, not, impossible, a little stressful to kind of get up on top. And all of a sudden you see these pit houses on top. Yes. Oh, Susan, I have been there. That is such a remarkable place.
Yes, it is. I couldn't even believe it was out there because you feel like, again, you're in the middle of nowhere and all you're looking at is desert and lava and on top of a mesa. Yeah, when you're standing on the ground, you don't know what's up there. And there's a trail that takes you along the side of the mesa, and it is a little strenuous to get on top.
Yes.
And the only thing running through my mind when we were doing that is, I'd hate to have to climb up and down this every day to go get water.
I know.
And food. Yeah.
No, it's remarkable. I think when we were up there, we've been up there a couple times. I hadn't thought about this in a while. I'm really glad you brought that up. I think there's even pottery shards that were on the kind of on the walls up there at the top. And yeah, amazing. Because I think you're right. That's called an outlier. Yeah. And another thing about Chaco that I've watched a few movies on it and things that I believe the way that the city, or what we want to call it, the village, or what's the proper word for it, but they set up so much of their structures or streets having to do with the heavens, right? With the stars and the sun, and how they would mark time, and it was just it goes to your point of how advanced at the time it was.
Yes, and one day I hope to go up there when they have their stargazing parties.
Yeah,
I just think it would be amazing, and there's no light out there, which would make it spectacular.
In this story, Dita relates a truly remarkable experience, and it has to be one of the most fascinating stories I've ever heard. And it all took place while Dita was on a walk in Albuquerque.
I can share an experience. I live near the base of the Petroglyph Monument. And for those that don't know, the Petroglyph Monument is a massive lava escarpment on the west side of Albuquerque. It runs 17 miles north to south. And there's petroglyphs all over there, and it's just really neat to hike around and see that. And I actually had an experience, if I can share it. This has been some years ago. We would walk our dog out there, and there's in this area that we walk is not where the general public walks, and it's kind of a hidden place. Anyway, we were walking along in broad daylight, and my dog, I had him off leash, and he perks up, and I look ahead, and there is a big black dog on a lava rock at the end of this service road we were walking on. And my first thing was, I panicked because my dog is dog reactive, and I thought I'm going to have a dog fight. So I was running after him. My dog was running after the black dog. And of course, he's not listening to me whatsoever. And as I'm running, I see my dog jump up on top of the rock with him, and they're sniffing like dogs do. And as soon as I got up close, probably about 25 yards away at the most, 25 feet maybe. I'm horrible with measurements. But the black dog disappeared.
No kidding.
And it was just gone. And this overwhelming, and my dog is standing on the rock, confused, looking around.
Whoa.
Where's this dog?
Wow.
And there's nowhere it could have gone, because it either had to come towards me, or it's straight up on the mesa on one side, and it's a good 25-foot drop on the other side. There's nowhere it could have gone, and my dog would have chased after it had it gone somewhere.
No, wow.
Yes, and I had the only way I can explain it, an overwhelming feeling of evil came over me. Like afraid, like something inside said, you need to get out of here now. So I grabbed my dog, and he didn't want to go with me because he's still wondering where this thing went. And we ran home, and I was telling my husband about it, and he laughed and asked me, well, had I had anything to drink that day, but I don't drink. I don't drink. And I was like, I know what I saw. And if it had just been me, I could have explained it away as a shadow or something. But having the dog interacting with it.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to go out there for a few days. It did freak me out. And I have to say, coming from law enforcement, not much does. And this was something I can never say I ever felt afraid in law enforcement. This I was afraid of.
Wow.
And an overwhelming fear. So it was about 3 days later, my husband went with me. I'm like, I need to go out there for myself.
Yes.
And I want to poke around. I want to see, are there holes? Are there dens? I mean, where could this thing have gone?
Yes.
So we went out and looked around. Nothing that we could find. But down below, again, it's a 25-foot into a ravine. Sitting at the base of that is a giant lava boulder full of petroglyphs, covered. And the only thing I can equate it to is a road sign. It's got handprints. It's got footprints.
Wow.
It's got animals. It's got spirals. The whole thing is covered. And I was just, it's something that had bothered me for years. And I did an interview. It's on my website with L.A. Marzulli. He is, he's on YouTube, but he is a filmmaker and author, and he writes a lot about, supernatural phenomenon, paranormal phenomenon, very much into archaeology and that sort of thing. And I did an interview with him about a year ago, and he feels that, well, he says anytime you see the spiral petroglyphs, that is an indicator of a portal. And the story that I told is very similar, he said, to ones he's heard all around the world with an encounter with a black dog.
No kidding.
And that it was more than likely a shapeshifter.
Wow. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's, I'm going to probably get this all wrong, but I'm excited to talk about it. Isn't that part of the lore of the Southwest and New Mexico? Doesn't Tony Hillerman in his books will talk about this type of thing as well, right?
Yes. And he did bring that up, that especially where we're located here in the Southwest, it is a hotbed for it. And of course, I didn't talk about it for a long time because people look at you like you're crazy.
Oh, I think it's remarkable.
But I have to say that having that encounter inspires me to do more paranormal research.
Oh, I bet.
A lot of my books have that in them because I truly don't know what it was. And as somebody who's very logical, and I'm always trying to find a logical reason why something happened, I have never been able to find one for that. And then as the more I researched it, you do read about stories that people have had. I mean, just very similar. And I thought, well, not all of us are crazy. So something is going on. Something was there. And when I was talking with L.A. Marzulli, his thing was, well, you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and something inside you told you that. And I said, something did tell me, you better get out of here now.
Wow.
So, yeah, never know.
In this final story, Dita talks about the books she has written and why she chooses to write short stories. There's a quote in Unholy Script that kicks off the story that I have to, or maybe just a couple lines that I thought were just awesome. Because it comes up, I'm not going to give too much of away, but it comes up again at the end. And so your first lines, do you want to read those first lines from your book?
Oh, sure. I've killed twice. Once for love, twice to save the world.
I love that. And as you get into that, you're going to find out exactly why. There's elements of history, there's elements of archaeology, there's elements of mystery in there, and maybe a little spies, maybe something like that. Where does the inspiration come from these types of stories?
Well, a lot of the inspiration comes from my own love of archaeology and places and traveling and people. And I mean, I did spend 20 years in law enforcement, so a lot of my stories have a psychological thread, which I kind of glean from my years in law enforcement, and where you kind of learn people's behavior, what motivates them, why they do what they do. And I hope I bring that into my books. without having to write true crime, which I don't have any interest to write true crime because I feel like I did that for 20 years. I wrote police reports. That's true crime. So the Unholy Script deals with a very mysterious book that's been missing for hundreds of years, and it turns up in the Vatican archives. And you have an archaeologist who's your lead character, and that comes from my love of archaeology. The other one you mentioned, the Deceiver's Casket, is actually an item that the character comes across in the Smithsonian. And I got my idea for that from whenever I travel, I love to go to local museums. And there are some really interesting items that you will find. And I look at different items and I get story ideas. And that's where it comes from.
We've named two of them, the Unholy Script and Deceiver's Casket, but you have three others, right?
I do. I have Cave of Terror, which is a psychological thriller that usually people complain it's not long enough, but I'm just going to throw this out there. You may see it again in longer form.
Oh, spoiler alert. Yeah. There we go.
That one, I actually got the idea for it was I was in Israel in February of 2020 with my elderly mom and my brother and sister-in-law, and this was a bucket trip for my mom as well as for us. And we visited a place, it's the Banias Nature Preserve, and it sits in northern Israel up along the Lebanon border, right at the base of Mount Hermon. A lot of pagan worship. It's a lot of human sacrifice that went on, but it is actually a beautiful place. It's the headwaters of the Jordan River, and there you will find the Grotto of Pan. This is where they worshipped the god Pan, and it's actually a cave with a pool of water. Nobody knows how deep it goes because nobody's gone in to look at it, but way back, they would perform human sacrifices to placate Pan, and if blood floated on the water, it meant that he did not accept their sacrifice.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah, very dark history for such a beautiful place, which I thought was ironic. So, Cave of Terror, that was inspired by that visit. I have another one out called The Legend of Thornwood Manor. That one is a ghost story. I love spooky mansions. I grew up as a kid reading those stories, and it's just something I like to read. But in my books, you'll notice I always do a letter to the reader at the end of the story to explain a little bit about what motivated me to write that. In Legend of Thornwood Manor, I was looking at how legends are formed. So how does one story grow and grow and grow over generations that it just becomes immersive in a town? And nobody can actually go back and look at what actually the originating story was, because the legend has grown and grown. So that's Legend of Thornwood Manor. I have another one out. It is The Legend of Whispering Pines Inn. That is about a very ghostly inn in the middle of the forest, and this couple are on a road trip. So that kind of inspired me because I've been on many road trips, and they encounter a storm and they find this inn, and there's all kinds of stuff going on in this place that's supernatural. And that was just something that I like to look at. You know, when you're traveling, you go through small towns, you'll go through periods where there's just absolutely nothing around, and then you'll see a building, and you're like, who lives out here? How did this, what is this?
Right.
So that was the inspiration with that. And then my latest release is, that one is set in Gothic. It's a Gothic horror, but it's not gory. And
you have to put it in a freezer.
No. Again, yeah, I don't write gore, but I do want people to have an adrenaline rush when they're reading it. Yeah. But it's The Mirror of the Damned, and that is about a mirror that this Sir Richard Harcourt, who is a very wealthy man in 1700 England, goes into a curio shop in London, Mr. Abernathy's shop, and he is just drawn to this mirror. And so the store owner tells him about the history of the mirror and how it's cursed, and cool. he thinks it's just like, oh, okay. But it is, there is a curse to it, and I won't give away the story. But that motivation to write that comes from me. I love going antiquing. I like going into antique stores and looking at items and going, wow, what's the story behind this item? I bet this has seen so much history, if only it could talk. So that was my motivation on that one. But it really, it's everyday life. That's what I tell people is there's mystery in life in general. And I think we're so busy most of the time and working and caring for families, and that we don't stop to look at things going on around us. There's supernatural things, whether people believe in that or not. I think we've kind of become numb to seeing those things. So for me, I try to, whether it's a place or it's an object or people, I've been sitting in a coffee shop overhearing a conversation, and it's just like, wow, where did that conversation, I wonder what the start of that conversation was. And then that inspires me to maybe include something like that in one of my books.
Wow. So it just kind of being open and watching the wonders that go on around us. Talk to me a little bit about the gift of a short story, or what your approach is, and why this is, meaningful for you, and why you're approaching your work this way now. The short stories.
The short stories are hard, and they do force me to improve my craft, and it is a skill, and I'm getting better at it. I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but how can I make something so thrilling and have a lot of, I guess, description and character, because you want your reader to love your character in a few pages. Yes. And it's not something I can spend, hours and years writing. People spend a year or more sometimes writing novels, which are 100,000 words and up. And to me, I feel like I would get really bored. I think a lot of that is my thing. I want to turn it out fairly fast. And it's a thrill for me to get it published, and then people give me feedback. Yeah. And that's what I want to do, is I want to entertain people. That's my number one thing with writing. I want to inspire and entertain them. And I was kind of, writers in general deal with imposter syndromes. And it's like, well, I'm only writing short stories. Am I really an author? Well, yes. And I saw an amazing interview with Stephen King and another one with Ray Bradbury, who wrote Something Wicked This Way Comes, which was turned into a movie. When I was a kid, I went and saw it. It really inspired me. And I had no idea that Stephen King started out with short stories. Ray Bradbury started out with short stories. And their biggest advice to new writers, start out with a short story. Mm-hmm. Really perfect your craft. And that's kind of where I've been writing in. And I do have longer works, and I'm working on them. But the short stories are the things that I can turn out fairly quickly. And I like reading them. Like I said, I have a short attention span. A lot of people do.
Me too. Absolutely.
This is why TikTok is so big. I
was just going to say, I think the trend is that they're getting shorter and shorter. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's why short stories appeal to me.
And you do. You do a remarkable job in it, for sure. In fact, I think at least the way that you've done it is you've it's remarkable. It has to be harder to craft everything that you did in a Holy Script in 41 pages. I could see that unfolding over, I don't know, with 300 pages or whatever, how you did that, and the choices you have to make and the words you have to use and how you really got to capture them in one sentence versus 10 pages or something. I think you have a real gift.
Thank you. Yeah. And I have a very good editor, I must say.
Got to chop half this out of here.
Yeah. She's usually really good at like cut. And so.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I think that can be inspiring perhaps for some other authors that are out there to think that they have to somehow create the great American novel, their first one out, but just to maybe put out what's on their heart and what they're seeing can get them going and take them to a place where they are inspiring or entertaining other people.
Exactly.
So thanks for sharing that. Thank you for listening to this edition of the Stories to Tell podcast. Be sure to subscribe to Stories to Tell so you don't miss the next shows that'll be coming out soon.